All right. Well, welcome everybody to our first Sunday Satsang, if you will. And today we're talking about the fourth chapter, and I am that. It's kind of a fun one for me. Yep. It's kind of a fun one for me because it's about causation, which is one of the real basic underpinning loops that run for humans in terms of how they hold their stories. Um, so. So it makes the stories feel real and real tight, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But let me just read you Nisargadatta, and you'll and this is page 27 if you want to follow along. I saw Brad had his I am that. Um, so Maharaj at the top of the page, he goes, causation means succession in the time of events and space, the space being physical or mental. Time, space, causation are mental categories arising and subsiding within the mind. And so that's his very beginning is to uh, point out that causation is in the mind. That's where it exists because that's where time and space are held. And if you ever think about it, you can kind of figure this one out because you actually believe that there's such a thing as time, and in essence, there isn't. If you simply think about what reality is, you're always here and now. There's nowhere else that you ever are, right? So if you want to talk about time, the only thing that would let you know that there's duration occurring, let's say within manifestation, is just the fact that things change. That's the only clue that you have to say, oh, okay. But what we do is we construct a story, and it's like a tube, if you will, right? And what it has is space and time, and we think that we're walking through that tube, right? That's how this is happening. So if you think about your life, it's like, well, I'm walking through my life right now. I'm talking, and then I'll walk through to this next piece, and then I'll walk through to the piece after that. But if you actually examine your life, what you're going to find is that you sit here in the moment, and actually the parade, you're not in the parade, right? The parade is actually making itself known in front of you. So I often use the example of being at your 5-year-old and your 70-year-old birthday party and realizing that it's the same exact apperception or perception that you are there in exactly the same way. There's a 5-year-old body and there's a 70-year-old body, but the perception of what's going by or going through, same thing. So that's where Nisargadatta starts, and then he goes then he starts to tear it apart, and we'll chatter about this, but he says the next thing he says, like everything mental, the so-called law of causation contradicts itself. No thing in existence has a particular cause. The entire the entire universe contributes to the existence of even the smallest thing. Nothing could be as it is without the universe being what it is. When the source and ground of everything is the only cause of everything, to speak of causation as a universal law is wrong. The universe is not bound by its content because its potentialities are infinite. Besides, it is a manifestation or expression of a principle fundamentally and totally free. Now, I'm not entirely sure. I love it when he says that. I think that's a beautiful way to put it because um, from there you can start to see that he's attacking every single story that we believe that we live in. So if you think about it, might remember when you're a little kid and you got in your bedroom and you might have done what I did and put a blanket over and created a fort, and you'd get your little book out, right? And you're all of 4 or 5 years old. So I mean, dragons existed and unicorns. I mean, all of that stuff existed, right? And you would sit in your little tent and you would invite all of those folks in, right? If you were reading a book, all of those players could come in and that they could participate with you, right? And it was alive. It was fun. I mean, when you're a child, I mean, it's happening. Well, what that is the I am, which is the piece of who we all are before it's differentiated itself. So I am blank. If I am Alan, now I've taken that next step, right? When you're a little kid and you start doing those stories, that's the step. What you're doing is you're taking the I am step and you're identifying things and including those in your story, right? When you think about how your story works, why are stories so compelling? And it's because they're so alive. And what we do is we think that the actual piece is in the story, the aliveness is in the story, and it's not. The aliveness is in you as the I am, right? You lend that to everything, you know. So some stories are exciting and some stories aren't. You know, I have friends who are great mathematicians and I'm not. And although I'm good with numbers, I wouldn't call myself a mathematician. But what's interesting is that when I first ran into mathematics and calculus and all that stuff, it was boring. I hated it, right? Well, the reason was the I am that was extending itself out of Alan could not bring any life to that thing, right? It was like giving resuscitation to a dead horse. You know, it just was not going to happen. I could not make calculus live and be exciting. Now I have friends that they die to do that. You know, that really becomes exciting. Well, it turns out that I kind of enjoy the entrepreneurial side of life, right? So that's an exciting thing. That's a story that makes sense to me, and I can lend everything to it. The I am attaches itself to that, right? And guess what? As I got into it, I figured out we use numbers. Now that math is exciting math, right? Because that math is the story of what's happening inside of the activity or the story of making money, which is a lot of fun, right? That's what making money is. So solving calculus, not so fun. Making money, man, I got math for you coming out my ears. And that's how we are in all stories. If you look at the stories that interest you, right, and you look at the stories that don't interest you, you can divide them up that way. And so that life gets extended into that story. Now, manifestation, all it is change. And so we live in essence in that I am world with the insecurity of change. And the way that we try to offset that is by making our stories feel in some way solid and permanent. And the way we do that is to begin to ignore things that don't match to our story, right? And always attach anything that does. And that's what Nisargadatta is talking about when he talks about causation. He's going, causation is such a large thing that it has pieces and parts happening. There's pieces and parts happening in the arising of manifestation. In fact, our minds, right? I forget what the number is, but it's something like in every nanosecond, there's a million transactions in every biological being. Right. Well, I'm here to tell you that even though humans are the ones that have an intellect, that intellect is not equipped to track a million transactions per nanosecond and then multiply that times all of the people and biological beings that you'd have to multiply that. It just can't track all of that. So literally what we do is we replace our inability, which would breed insecurity, and we replace that with stories that feel secure, and then we go out and look for reasons to make that the case. And probably one of the most compelling one is causation. You know, it's a really cool little thing. As I said, you can always do that. Um, I told a story last time about going to Disneyland when I was a kid, and they had a ride called Autopia, and it's on a track, right? And so it goes down the track, and the car turns right. The steering wheel's not attached to anything. So if you're a 5-year-old kid, if you turn your wheel right and the car goes right, you think, man, I'm ready to be a race car driver. Here I am, right? You go to the next turn and you turn right and the thing goes left, and you're like, oh man, I'm the worst that ever was, right? Because you're still a kid, you're going to account for all of that, right? Well, as an adult, what you would say is, wow, that first turn was great, but I'm pretty sure that the drive shaft broke on the second one, you know, or whatever it was that you would create so that you could keep your story that you're a great race car driver. That's what your goal is. Causation is like that. And we don't even see it. It actually, we embrace causation to such a degree that it happens within us unconsciously and unseen. So as you work with this, what Nisargadatta is after here is two things. And one of the things, it's kind of an interesting thing because you're always stuck in this place. First of all, if you can see through the stories, now you've arrived at pure awareness, right? Or there's another, remember, this can get a little bit of, you can use different terminology. One of this, from out of I am that, I don't know what, I have to find the chapter, but it's when all the false self-identifications are thrown away, what remains is all embracing love. That's straight from Nisargadatta, right? Well, and in other places, he's simply telling you it's pure awareness. So pure awareness, all embracing love, whatever that beyond place is. So you're always working with, how do I dissolve the stories that keep me in bondage? Fair enough, right? But at the same time, there is this, and I think in a lot of spiritual seeking, what you see is the forgetting of pure awareness, or what the beyond is. In other words, that's not, what a lot of folks do is they settle into a spiritual path, and they just simply say, well, my ego is going to become more spiritual. I'm going to become more spiritual. They never step out of that to see that what the ego or self-identification is, it's a concept just like causality. It's the same thing, right? And so dissolving the concepts and stories, right? And remember, stories sometimes are hard. They're hard to let go of because you actually have this unconscious world that you've created out of this exciting I am that you are, right? That's feeding this whole thing. It's sometimes it's very difficult to get a chink in the story. And so that's what Nisargadatta is after here. Any questions? Comments? All right, cool.
Yeah, I can say
So
something.
go ahead.
This is not a big deal. It's just one of those lovely synchronicities. And when I open it up to chapter 4, it's on a different page in my book than yours. But the thing that I had 3 stars next to was the very quote that you read, like everything mental, the so-called law of causation contradicts itself. I
Yeah.
love that. One of my
Yeah.
faves.
Well, and see, that's why I think it's the understanding that he always carried, that the emphasis was in the wrong place most of the time, right? So yes, you attack the stories and concepts. In fact, I've talked a lot about that up to this point in time, because that's where the moving pieces of a conversation live. What does one say about absolute awareness other than it's there, and if you're lucky, you'll fall off the ledge, and there you go. I mean, that's kind of how that part lives. So what we spend our time talking a lot about is the dissolving and finding the holes in the stories so that those stories can fall, right? But that's not where ultimately the action's going to be. If you go to the next page, um, he's really there in the next set of questions. He goes, the real world is beyond the mind's ken. We see it through the net of our desires. Remember that I am that's making up those stories? Well, that's where your desires live. Divided into pleasure and pain, right and wrong, inner and outer. To see the universe as it is, you must step beyond the net. It's not hard to do because the net is so full of holes. Now, one of the funniest things I think is funny is that when the questioner, my impression of the questioner in this chapter was that he was trying to stand firm in terms of what he was speaking to Nisargadatta about. Um, at least that's an error that I get in the reading, that he was really trying to show Nisargadatta, hey, look, I know you say there's no causation, but come on, man. What drunk world are you living in? There's scientists that say that's true, right? So here's the thing that he says. It just cracks me up. He goes, "What do you mean by holes? Question mark. And how do you find them?" Right? This is a revelation to him, right? Holy cow, what's going on there? And And so as Nisargadatta would do, he always cuts to the bone. He goes, look at the net and its many contradictions. You do and undo at every step. He says, you want peace, love, and happiness, and work hard to create pain, hatred, and war. Right? Pretty simple. You know, you want longevity. I'm going to ask for them to take this little piece out, by the way. You want longevity and overeat. You want friendship and exploit. I'm okay with the friendship part, no problem. The longevity and overeating, I'm in that category. Um, See your net as made of such contradictions and remove them, and your very scene will make them go. So in my little story about driving the car, right? If the kid said, wow, I turned right and it went right, I turned right and it went left, what I think is happening here may not be happening here. That's where the action is, right? Not, hey, I'm going to eliminate the left-hand turn because it doesn't fit into my story of what's exciting about being great in a race car, right? The bigger question is, wait a minute, something's wrong here. Those things happen every day. Those things happen every day to you. That these contradictions arise, something that you're pretty sure in your story operates as an intricate piece of your story, foundational piece, and yet that piece does it happens in its opposite. It happens all the time.
Would
And and tracking that, noticing that, you begin to poke the holes in every one of your stories. Go ahead, Brad.
would you mind if I read something that would take maybe 60 seconds?
Go for it.
I wrote this back in 2017, and I just remembered it when you were talking about stories. Goes, please don't get lost in your story. As enchanting and entertaining as it may be, as breathtaking and heartbreaking as it may have been, it's a story we've all heard before. It's your story, my story, our stories, and our stories stack higher than a skyscraper of 1,000 stories. Do we really need such monuments to such memories, prying us from the present and serving more as mere prisons than prisms of light, spreading rainbows of possibilities to an ever delighted heart? That's it.
Beautiful piece.
I
So
I just
mine's a story. I always say, walk into a restaurant that's kind of got a bunch of people in it sometime, right? And as you do, find a couple, and better if you find a couple that's been with each other for a long time, and then you eavesdrop, right? So always eavesdrop on people's conversations in restaurants. That's kind of required, and
okay.
so you do that. And here's what the conversation's going to be. They've been married for 40 years, right? 40 years. And what they are doing is they're telling each other who they are, right? That's the conversation, right? Because what happens is we ride along on this bike and it moves this way and it moves that way. And so we're forever amending who we are with these little changes and shifts and everything. So you don't believe that that woman or that man knows what that other person's about or what's going on there? Yeah, I got 40 years, right? And this old dude is telling me who he is. Find me a wife with 40 years that doesn't know what the heck is going on with the man she's hanging around. Like that's not going to happen, right? It's in fact, she may have an Encyclopedia Britannica in the garage that she's hiding from you about everything she's tracked in your life. It's like that's how that happens. And men track it a little differently, but trust me, we have our own Encyclopedia Britannica because if she does something that doesn't work, it clangs, right? You're going, wait a minute, something's up here. Yeah, that what that was not it. And so we all know that. We all do that, right? Yet when we converse, our insecurity demands that we balance our image of ourselves. And what we have to do, the first place of resort is the person that's been with you longest. So you really have to establish it with that person. Whatever the changes in your personality from last night, well, tonight at dinner, you need to sort that out with your wife. Your wife she hasn't gotten the news yet, right? The email didn't show up. She doesn't know
Oh
that
yeah.
actually, right? You used to be hot tempered. Turns out you're actually perfectly at peace. Who knew? Right? So she needs to know that immediately after 40 years of being hot tempered, you need to tell her you're not hot tempered. That's all wrong. Right. So now you have that part of the conversation with her and the reverse. Right. So
Yeah.
those are those stories, and I did enjoy the little comment about that. About we've heard the story before in your
Oh
little
yeah.
That was because think about how often you tell the same story,
You've heard
just
them all, man.
especially trying to tell somebody who you are. And then notice how much time we spend telling people who we are, right? That's kind of our hobby. Well, it's more than a hobby. There's another word for it. I'd call it an occupation, but I don't think anybody pays you for it. So I guess unless you're a writer and you're trying to convince the whole world that that's the case.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, yeah. So he stepped now notice, so he dips back into this place where he talks about the holes, right? And then bang, go to the next page, and he says, but the source of all that is the infinite possibility, the supreme reality, which is in you, and throws its power, light, and love on every experience. That's the story piece I was talking to you about. But this source, okay, so we see and experience our stories, all of this light that's being thrown from the I am, and we're identified with the I am, and we think we're the I am. And so what we do is we play our life as though that I am is what's at play. That's what we do, right? And here he's blowing that right up because he says this source is not a cause, and no cause is a source. Because of that, I say everything is uncaused. You may try to trace how a thing happens. You cannot find out why a thing is as it is. A thing is as it is because the universe is as it is. Now, I remember, I think it was Longfellow was sitting with a child one day, and he asked him, he said, "Why is the grass green?" And the child looked at him with a face of like, "Dude, you're really stupid." He goes, "The grass is green because it's green," right? Because at some level, right, there's no need to break out an explanation. It's apparent, right? The grass is green because, well, it's green. No cause. It comes that way, right? Something to think about. Ramesh, I always talk about this. One of his things, every satsang, he would say, go home, find the thing that you think that you're the most responsible for in your life today in your life, right? And he said, and then take everything that needed to be there, right, in order for that to have happened, knowing that when you were done with listing all of those things, because you could never list them all probably anyway, right? And in the chapter, so Ramesh would send people to do that because he felt like the collision of seeing that what you thought was responsible for um, would help dissolve this tight grasp that we have on the who we are and the stories that we tell. And that's where that piece lives, and it is really really important. And so he was always that was every guru. Nisargadatta was set on the I am. Ramesh was that. Papaji was be silent and come to satsang. Depends on how they want to approach, but they seem to always have their kind of magic little thing that they like to do, and that's and certainly that was Ramesh's, and well taken. And so you begin to see that your story of who you are, right, covers or obscures the possibility of recognizing who you really are as absolute awareness, or what was the love he used, all embracing love. That was the term that Nisargadatta uses. So that's as you begin to see that, you now have both pieces, the all embracing love and my story that obscures it. So never are you in the service of dissolving a story without understanding, right? In everything, and you'll see as we go through these chapters that Nisargadatta, more so than anybody I have ever seen, comes back again and again and again and again, right? It's absolute awareness, all embracing love, whatever the term is, right? He'll talk all about a lot of things, this, that, and the other, and bang, he always roots it there, right? And that's the thing to notice, and know that in your world, that's where you um, that's where you need to pay attention to that, because what happens is you start to attack little things, right? I always talk about this. We used to talk about there was a direct method and an indirect method. The indirect method is when you're solving little issues in your life and they dissolve and you're happy for a moment. Or as Buddha would say, the only time that you're at peace is the time after an issue has dissolved and before the next issue has presented itself. So you have that little time of peace, which is cool. Um, and so seeing that, but what happens is that people begin to believe that they need to apply that dissolution piece to every story that arises. But what's the ultimate story? Right? It's the one that couple that's been married 40 years to each other is talking about, which is who I am. Dissolve that story and all the rest of it goes with it. But I always say if you're dissolving issues, it's like 31 flavors, right? You serve up the dissolution in an ice cream cone, and there's a line of 50 issues with their number in their hand waiting to go, here you go, do this one. Here you go, do this one. And so that can become your focus, and it becomes your focus without paying attention to the bigger picture. Go ahead, Michael.
When I went through this process, as far as stories go, there's the ego, which is experienced as a collection of stories, if you will.
Mhm.
Um, as those stories dissolved, I didn't immediately jump into the absolute. I actually landed on what I would call the I am, or the witness, that is aware of all of those stories that were arising. And then from there, it was like a matter of dissolving that I amness as the original contraction or the original story. Is that, can you do both, or is there?
Oh no, that's perfect because what happened is what caused you to once the I amness was what was present, right? To continue to understand that wasn't where the action was. What caused that, right? Well, what caused that was the understanding, in fact, the living understanding that had told you, you knew that wasn't where it was. You were able to know that, so you didn't stop, right? And what I'm talking about is, yes, that's exactly the way it happens most of the time. And in fact, and I don't know if this was part of your experience or not, but Ramesh used to talk about free samples because once you're in that I am space and you start to crack that, then we get these moments of free samples, which then close back up and you're back, picking apart the I am again. But it does go back and forth, right? But the reason that happens is that there's never a let go of the understanding. One is settled on the I am, knowing that that is a collapsible um, piece, right? You know that. Usually you first start with the stories, right? And so that quote unquote is indirect. You certainly don't want to get stuck there, as I said. So most people end up migrating, the dissolution starts to happen. They migrate to the I am and they go, oh, I'm the problem. I got it. And so how is it that I hold myself and that I am, that I amness, it gets to where exactly as you said, it then dissolves itself and then the next piece arises, and that's that. Yeah. So that what you said tracks exactly with where I was. I didn't put that little piece in there is all. But that's exactly the movement. Yeah.
Yeah. Alan, is it okay? I just had a couple of
Please
responses.
go.
Yeah, no, first of all, I feel so liberated. And it was a couple of things. First of all, Krishnamurti, when you mentioned the couple who know each other for 40 years, pointing out that we all have images of each other. And so we really never do know the person that we're with. We could be with them 100 years. So that changed everything for me. Very mind blowing to realize, having an image of my adult son, or I'm having an image that'll help me to drop it. And then Nisargadatta, although it was a second career, I was in New York City as a visual artist, but I did become a psychoanalyst. And his whole thing about the universe, things are the way they are because the whole universe deems it so. That helped me to, I have no stories about myself anymore because I realized all that analysis I was doing, which I dropped my career because of actually Eckhart Tolle saying, we only suffer the voice in our head, but it's all related. But it's funny how you realize that you can come up with stories why something is, why you felt the way. There's no it's not exact. You may change your mind next week, next year. You may look back, oh, it was because of that, because there's no truth to it. And so that Nisargadatta part really helped me to drop stories, realizing, oh, it's because the whole universe. So I don't have to waste my time trying to figure out why my mother did this, why this one did this. Do you know what I mean? It just cuts through everything for me. So I just want to share. It's so both are liberating. I mean, I listen to a few people, and I used to go hang out at Muji's in Portugal. So, but
Yeah,
yeah.
no,
So
he's
thank you.
fun.
And I
Well,
love Papa G's.
yeah, I mean the thing, what was the Buddhists say that, what you are is a set of arising um uh attributes, none of which are connected. And so I always find that to be just a funny definition of the who you are. So what happens is that the body mind, of course, continues to hold. It knows how to run those stories. In fact, a lot of times it'll trigger into a story, and even right at the moment of triggering, right, the story's happening, but at the same time, you're sitting in the back giggling in a certain way. And Nisargadatta had that. That was, I always use the example when one of these people came in and asked a question, and he goes, "That's the stupidest question I ever heard." And then everybody starts laughing. Well, Nisargadatta was, kind of short-tempered, and wasn't a lot of space in how he thought things. If he said something, you should automatically onboard that, and there you are. So that was his expectation, and that was the story that was in him, if you will. But it would happen, and they'd be giggling from the moment it arose. Everybody in the whole place would know, oh, so in a certain way, when the stories run, when there's no you that's identified with those stories, well, now it's just simply entertainment, which the rest of everything is as well, right? I mean, you can't imagine being in some of the business meetings that happen, and someone's selling a company or what the heck ever, right? And as you sit there, you're having a conversation that absolutely doesn't matter. But man, these folks are serious because there's millions of dollars at stake, and this and that and the other. And your personality is talking to them and telling them things that fit into that particular story, because that's what you do, right? That's the, as a business person, if you're involved in, I was in the merger acquisition world, so we told lots of stories about, um, companies, right, and what those companies would look like. So, and you sit there with the knowing as the speaking is occurring, right? That this is just a lot of stuff that doesn't matter, and so just recognize that the entirety of life in a certain way, doesn't matter. And that's how it is. And yeah, you get up every morning, and guess what? Have you ever gotten up in the morning and everything else isn't there? No, it's still there. It doggedly and stubbornly is there every morning. I'm 72. For 72 years, every morning I've gotten up, and you know what? The rest of it's all here, always. So, okay. So you are in essence located in a cosmic joke. And that's great. That's great. Seeing that it's the case, and then having the place beyond take its position where it should be positioned, right? Then life is good. I mean, sometimes because I can't help myself, I'll see historical or current personalities and think to myself, wow, that must be a stream of entertainment. Can you imagine? You pick somebody out, right? Can you imagine that one? Holy cow! I mean, sometimes I just can't help it. I'm like, oh my God, I'd love to be on a ride along for a day there, see how that one plays. Holy cow! But so what you say is exactly true. You're not what you are. So when somebody talks about an illusion, you just have to remember that in the West, we're so serious. So an illusion means it doesn't exist. An illusion actually is a story that doesn't really exist or happen the way you think it happens. That's an illusion, right? Because you believe in something that isn't the case. That's an illusion. It doesn't mean that it's not happening, right? Or something's not happening, right? Something's happening, but the illusion is in the way that story is held. And if you identify with how that story is held, well, then, you could say that the location of absolute awareness or all embracing love is not making itself known, right? Now, we all know that no matter what you see, what you do, all of that, um, that the viewing is always absolute awareness, even if you don't know that's the case. So, so no problem, if your life includes stubbornly demanding that you get to be the centerpiece of what's happening, and that's the story you tell, you get to do that. Because absolute awareness really doesn't, it's like, okay, have fun with that. I got what's going on over here. So the viewing with no viewer, or the perceiving with no perceiver, is always in play through all biological beings that have perception. And it may be at play in because we think some things don't have perception, and I'm not sure we know that's true. So there you go. It's a little like you pick up a rock and you go, this has no sentience. But how do you know that, right? You don't see anything moving there, so you go, it's just a damn rock, but who's to say that the story we have of rocks is the case when it comes to sentience? So just something to think about. I mean, every single notion, every single concept is constructed. And in that construction, you end up with an embedded contradiction. Every story has that. There's no story. Now, when we start to work with, because Nisargadatta and Ramesh and all this, they work with what they call a living understanding. And that's simply to build a picture in a story form of what is happening, including awareness and the perception and all the rest of it. But we know that in the end, even that story disappears. That's the story that it's like the boat that Buddha talks about. You go across the river. You don't put the boat on your shoulder, leave it on the shore, and continue on. So a lot of what we build in as devices, right? That's what they're like. So, as an example, we had that comment about meditation, and so when I look at meditation, right, I'm always like, that's a device, because what creates identification most of the time is velocity and volume. So the velocity of happenings and the volume of happenings are so much that the mind cannot hold that there's something beyond that. And so it loses itself in the happenings. And so meditation is a device intended to place you in a spot where the velocity of happening is low and the volume of happening is low, right? And now the idea is that losing track of absolute awareness won't happen, right? It gives you more of a chance of not losing it. Now you speed it all up, and you know how it is. A lot of times it goes right away, but meditation is intended to gradually carve out that space. The only danger with meditation is if you believe you're meditating and you have a practice of meditating. So you have to watch for that one, because you slow everything down, but in the end, if all you've done is slowed it down for you as an ego, then now you just have another story about what a great meditator you are, right? Which I guess if you're a great meditator, you can, I don't know, maybe get a certificate or a medal or something. But the reality is it doesn't lead one if there is that identification with who the meditator is. Yeah.
Ellen, you said
Exactly.
you had a
That's why,
second story?
I have a,
Huh?
Oh, I thought Ellen had like a second story. I was going to ask if
Oh
she.
yeah, she's just started.
Yep, sorry.
oh no, just quickly. No, that's why, with Nisargadatta, I put on top of a piece of paper every morning. I've been doing it for years. Meditation, it says definite through a few number of thoughts, and it has helped me to stay empty most of every day. I'm not resisting them, I'm letting them pass through, or I'm ignoring them, whatever I'm doing. But it's like, I just find that so helpful. It's like not harboring thoughts. No thought is a truth. So Yeah, and it's just, I just think it's the best definition or one of the.
Well, in a way, isn't that like Papa G, who said, "Keep quiet, come to satsang"? You know, your reading of Nisargadatta is kind of your satsang every day. She froze, so I'm not sure she got that. So there you are. Cool. You're gonna say something, Brad? Were you in?
Yeah, I love hearing this because I've spoken of these things so many times because you and I have read a lot of the same books, and I know that you've done your work over the years. But the thing that gets me is every time the clarity is there without any story or anything going on, everything around you just meaningless. And I don't mean like negative. I mean like it's just here, you know.
Yeah.
So what?
Yeah. Well, and some people will even talk about how they have a hard time even performing, if you will, because of that meaninglessness.
Oh yeah.
And if you think about it, that's actually one of the last pieces of the story experience,
Hmm.
right? Because if you think that there needs to be meaning for you to throw yourself into something, you're describing a world of duality where you as an ego can throw yourself into something, right? But unfettered and free, right? Beyond being hooked to meaning, right? You are absolutely, um, free and unfettered and can show up to do whatever it is you want to do. So that's where they got there's a term called Mahayogi. I don't know if you've ever heard that or not, but a Mahayogi, the reason that Maha gets thrown in there is the ability to enjoy whatever arises to its absolute fullest, because
Yeah.
there's no meaning to stop the embrace of that, right? So squeezing
Yeah.
life like a lemon, ends up being absolutely so the there's an excitement in understanding that meaningless is exactly the terrain we tread on, and yet, right, we're built to be there and in the middle of the fray.
Yeah.
And there,
I had a good friend that was walking around a salad bar with Ram Dass before he died. And he was, you know, they become pretty good friends because he was running a show in San Francisco that Ram Dass was talking at. Anyway, long story short, they're walking around the salad bar, and my friend Jeff says to him, "You know what? I'm comfortable with a lot of things, but man, why does everything have to seem so meaningless?" You know?
yeah,
And Ram Dass says, "Make friends with meaninglessness." I
yeah.
like that line.
I mean, it's really hilarious because I used to say this. I don't know if I can say it exactly, yeah, but I used to say this to Michael all the time, because one thing he and I share is kind of although it's in different areas, we do share an enjoyment of a lot of different kinds of writing and intellectual kinds of stuff. I love philosophy. So we have our own angle on it, but we both enjoy that. And I used to say that I'd say, well, if you take all of the books that demand that meaning is part of what the exercise is and throw those away,
Yeah.
when you go to your desert island, you're going to have about 5 books left.
Yeah, man.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
It's probably more than that, but you know what I'm trying to
Half a
say.
dozen, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, there's not, I mean, the entirety of the stories of humanity that you and I deal with every day are taking what Nisargadatta and what we're all talking about right now, um, as though they didn't exist. It just simply ignores that part, because
Yeah.
what makes a man, or what makes mankind mankind, is this quest for meaning,
Yeah.
right? And so that's the absolute definer, right? You already are in a pickle. So, like, a lot of times I'll see someone that wants to start on their spiritual pilgrimage, and you'll start with them and they'll go, no, no, I want to do it this way. Right. And so one of the first things that you want to unhook yourself of is your right to say how your spiritual journey should occur. That one is a dead bang loser.
Yeah.
Right. So if you have that, and that's part of what you're up to, right, that you may want to lose that one right away, because that piece will keep you out of the game.
Yeah.
It's like, no, I'm going to do exactly what you're doing, but this other way. And you're like, Yeah, that's not going to work. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't other ways to do things. I'm not saying that,
Sure.
but the openness to a life where meaning actually is transcended, right? Where meaning just simply isn't any longer, right? That openness needs to be there. If that openness isn't there, then your demand to do it your way is going to include that meaning is wrapped in there.
Yeah.
That's, now you look at what we talked about today, causation is kind of this, ugly little thing that sticks in everything and holds it all together. Right. And Osho used to talk about that kind of thing was a tiger in the corner. And when you're in the room with a tiger in the corner, he says, my advice is never take your eye off of that sucker. you know so if you're in a room with a tiger who says everything has to have meaning, don't lose sight of that guy. That's
Yeah.
that guy is not there for you.
Yeah.
So
I think
I think
oh, go ahead. Go ahead,
just
Ellen.
quickly, I was going to say, that, I think it's Nisargadatta who said it, but if it's not, maybe Papa G, I love. But don't get bored with peace. And so when people talk about meaninglessness, that's like to me the mind's coming back in and saying, "Oh, this is meaningless." It's like actually you're feeling quite peaceful and one with all life, a harmony. But it's like, oh, nothing's happening. The mind always. I feel like the mind always will come in because there's been times and I laugh where all of a sudden I'll feel bored because I am
right.
peaceful now. It's like the mind came in and said, "Oh, this is boring," you know. So I
Well,
feel
and,
like I
and
have
I
to
mean,
watch the mind.
think about that story I told earlier where you create this story, you're under the blanket creating the story. Well, you introduce your mind to this high level of excitement and movement as the standard. So when somebody says to you, hey, look, there's such a thing as permanent peace, oh, I want that. Right. I want because it's a ragged, jagged LSD trip in here for sure. So let's, because you create that's what you created. If you watch media, you ever notice that their biggest issue is they want to take everything and ramp it up every single day, right? Every day, just a little, and of course, there's no further to go a lot of times. But what happens is then you're handed permanent peace and you go, this is boring. I don't want that. If that's what you're talking about, I don't want that one. Because the mind is so conditioned to believe that whatever the outcome is, it needs to live in a pretty exciting place. Right. So a lot of times somebody will say, hey, I expect, I expect this awakening experience to be this thing that you can't believe. Right. And as Ramesh used to say, he'd say, if you're going to win the lottery, don't win it before you're enlightened. So there's someone to collect the money, because that's how boring it really is, right? You winning the lottery is like, okay, well, that happened. That was fun for the moment, that was fun, but back, so actually getting used to permanent peace and that place, right? It's an explosion for sure, but it's very quiet. And in fact, a lot of people giggle when it kind of happens, because they're like, this is it, right? What else would the mind say? This is it, right? I mean,
Well, the ego can't survive, right? So, I mean, it's not going to want it. It wants drama, conflict. To be honest, I've been in spiritual groups, mostly Eckhart Tolle ones. I have to laugh. I'm like the only person in my friend who like runs the session. It's like everyone's talking about their struggles, their strife. I'm like, and it's getting boring for me. I actually stepped away a bit because I thought, yeah, I'm not interested in that. It's all story. It's all, you know what I mean? The ego, it's survival of the ego. And so, yeah, it's like the ego's not going to survive if,
well,
if it can't be in the past or future, so.
I'll go find this. I've given it out to people that I know, but there's a very famous meeting when Ramesh meets Eckhart Tolle. This is years ago in Mumbai, right? And in my mind, you could have put Nisargadatta in this story, because Ramesh comes in, like Solomon, sword drawn, ready to cut the kid in half. Like he's not, and so I mean the meeting kind of goes. Eckhart Tolle says a sentence or two. Ramesh takes over and talks for the next hour. Right? That's how that went. But in very forceful terms. It's an amazing story. But if you want to get a feel for what Nisargadatta was like, or what, because this is somebody, and this is even a nicer version, and he still was bringing the wood. So that's that, and it's exactly what you say. It's the, we're not going to sit around and tell stories, right? We're going to use stories for sure, but that's not what, we're not here for you guys to come in, moan, groan, and wail, so we can all feel sorry for you for an hour, call it a satsang, and go home. Right. Maybe if you're Eckhart Tolle, you get the $20 in the tip jar, I guess. Right. But the bottom line is, being stuck in a world of perpetual story worth the $20 in the tip jar wouldn't be for me. I'd continue to sit on a bus bench and let people throw food at me as they go by. That's better than the tip jar. So that's just how I look at that one. But I'll get that piece out, and I'll post it up in the group. It's a hilarious piece if you enjoy that kind of, what's the flavor of, and it's what I was saying before, where when you look at Nisargadatta in every piece, he's going to basically go for the gold somewhere in every piece that he writes. It's in there, right? And that really is what makes him him. Whereas others, some days they would talk about it and other days they wouldn't. In other words, they didn't have to, they didn't have to do it that way. But the style of Nisargadatta was, you are always going for the gold, always, in everything that you teach. Yes, you teach all of the other stuff, but then you always tell everybody why. What's beyond. That's where the answer is. There's a really great one. One of my, and we'll do this one. There's a book that Ramesh Balsekar wrote called Pointers of Nisargadatta Maharaj. And in that book, it's in the early, he basically is writing these vignettes on satsangs and certain things that happened in them while he's with him from 79 to 81. But there's a man that comes in that has lost his son, just recently, very recently lost his son. And that is one of the strongest pieces I have ever read. I mean, because Nisargadatta goes, okay, well, I'm assuming you're not here for the normal woohoo. So now if you want to talk about this and get to what its possibility is, let's rock. And that's how he does it, right? And you're kind of like going, I mean, when you read it, you're thinking to yourself, well, that certainly is outside of human custom. Like somebody comes in, they're in pain, they just lost their son, and you say, park that crap on the bench. If you want to talk about something real, here I am. That's not the normal response to a grieving father, right? And yet that's where Nisargadatta comes from, and it's one of my favorite pieces, because what you see a lot of times is the perpetuating in the spiritual world of a lot of yakety yak, but no one is striking for the bone, and that's where Nisargadatta really sticks out among those. Ramana Maharshi had his version of that too, by the way, but he was a much sweeter guy. so Nisargadatta is more fun to talk about. So
Yeah, I want to thank you. Yeah, because Nisargadatta, he's just so, and I look over and block and whatever. I go to sleep to what is the kratom pointers? There'd be all Nisargadatta 4 hours.
yeah.
To me, I read every day the Ashtavakra Gita, so it's just my little.
Yeah. Cool. All right, guys. Anything else?
Yeah, just quick.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened, but I want to thank you because I love Nisargadatta. It is like a sword. It's good cutting, and it's.
Yeah, it really is. Go ahead, Brad.
I was just going to say, I think the reason I got so into Nisargadatta, I read his first book back in 2005, and I said, this is the guy you can't argue with. You can't argue with this guy. And I liked that because I saw him stripping away BS virtually every time he talked to somebody. And he showed heart from time to time too, but I just like the way he just kept coming back to, like you said, coming
Yeah.
back to the source, basically, you know?
I kind of giggle and laugh a little at Michael because his mind style and organizational style, and yet he's so deeply attracted to Nisargadatta, which kind of does away with some of that. And Michael will tell you that's true. So it's really a lot of fun, when he's doing that.
Yeah, I just thought of that. Oh, I can't hear you.
I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, um, I like the fact you can't argue with him, and it's also something that makes you less likely to start talking in ways that are deeply entrenched in stories, because once you've gotten used to that give and take with Nisargadatta, you start to feel, okay, I'm starting to go into a story. I'm starting to feel creepy because I'm going into a story, and I would just drop it, you know. And I
Yeah.
love that aspect of it. So that's all.
No, I mean, yeah, and I love, and I mean, the thing is that it's you end up being a walking contradiction because I
Yeah,
love story, it's exciting and everything, but obviously it's held for a use. So you see both, it's in duality, it lives in duality, so it has one aspect and it has another aspect. And what we do in duality is we turn right, we're a great driver, we turn left, so we don't use it for what it can be used for. And so as much as I love story, that has to be superseded. It has to be, it has to be transcendentally moved past, because that's where who we are resides. And so the story then becomes just simply an arising, but it doesn't mean that it's not amazing and beautiful and fun to work with and use for what it's for, and to recognize that how we're built as human beings and how we
sure.
cognize is completely built on constructing stories,
Yeah,
right? And so,
sometimes,
so actually
sometimes,
pulling that apart is really helpful a
yeah,
lot of times.
sometimes it's the only way to get a point across, you know,
It-
given the context you're in. Yeah, I get it from
well,
that
it is.
point.
Well, it is, and I mean, it's the way that people operate. They operate
Yeah,
their natural place of understanding as a story. When you go ask a question of a 4-year-old, and I guarantee you, he's going to tell you a story, right? Because that's all he's got, right? A 4-year-old, they haven't learned anything yet. So everybody considers them undereducated, and yet at 4, you might be the most educated you're going to be in your life, because you're speaking your natural language, and the rest of that crap that they lather on you as you go through school hasn't happened yet. So you just have to understand that the natural arising of this human output is story. So first thing we did, it's the strongest thing we do. So we tell people to do formulas and spreadsheets and concepts and all of that crap. You know, go to a meeting sometime and talk from that place and watch everybody fall asleep. Walk in and tell them a great story, and everybody's just tied in. There's a reason for that. So yes, that's true, but we want to use that to transcend itself.